The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you very much, and to the Minister of Education for bringing this forward. Thank you so much for the efforts on this. One of the things that we heard at the doors in my area, in the cafes and everywhere else we're at, was the choice, the actual choice that parents needed in education. It isn't necessarily that the public system is bad by any means, because there's lots of parents out there that love their public systems, that love their schools. But the fact that some of the nuances that were in place that kind of stifled some of the selection and some of the choice in the schools, that was a bit problematic. And when the last administration had made some other subtleties and changes that seemed to be getting in between the choice of parents, how they interfaced with the students, and how they could then interface with the teachers, that we managed to also change last session or the session before, that really resonated with folks. It's almost like they were starting to get back their freedoms, their choices, and those things to do that. Some of the things that were dispelling myths out there, when I first got into this and started going around, I didn't think if you had a public or a charter school or homeschooling that you could potentially go to university as some of the students. So that was dispelled. I had this bias again because I went through the public system, as did my wife, and we were educated in that manner. But hearing some of these things that were taking place, well, that's off the table. So if you have a homeschool or a charter school, a public school, you have the same opportunity to access the higher education, higher learning, etc. The other thing that was interesting is looking at some of the alternative models, Madam Speaker, was the Alberta's Teachers Union wasn't involved. So it was interesting to see some of those models out there that were outside of the traditional bubble. It didn't involve the same traditional unions or the way that the public schools were set up and managed. And what I'd seen there was something that what I was more accustomed to was that when the principal or the manager of an organization could actually critique, do performance evaluations, and manage their staff a lot better. What we'd also seen in some of these, and it was a bit of an eye-opener to me as well, was the performance in the test scores, and also access to individuals that were teaching programs that were actually masters in their craft or in their trade. So that was really interesting to see as well, and the flexibility and diversity out there. And some of the homeschoolers, they were concerned as well. It was to do with flexibility, the way that it worked for their family, their lifestyles. Those were some of the choices that they needed. So again, with potentially the lower numbers that we were seeing, it could be argued that also again some of the rules and nuances in place were also kind of stifling that. Now, when COVID took place, I think a bunch of us as parents that have kids at home got our eyes open towards what was taking place in some of the public school systems. The delivery method, what was being taught, and the performances. And it was interesting to see that most of these performances across the board have actually gone up for the students that are participating in those programs. The ones that were in private or the charter systems didn't really skip a beat. They were up and running within 2 or 3 days for the most part in my area, and they carried on, and their marks were reflective of that. So when we're talking about some of the issues, the members opposite are bringing up articles and items from United Nations and other acts and this act and that act, and almost putting in this fictitious barrier of saying that it's only the private schools or it's potentially only homeschooling that would have these issues. And I can only point, because I have 4 children in that system, that some of the teaching methodologies that we became aware of, there was one grade 4 teacher that had my daughter Faith in tears coming home from school because she was setting the kids up for failure. Now, it wasn't until my daughter came back and said, "That's it, I give up, I don't want to go to school anymore," and this really broke my heart because this little girl worked in this PowerPoint presentation and did this with her little friend, but her teacher didn't really give her good guidance on it. So when this girl goes up the first time and her teacher rips on her in front of the class and sits her down, my wife then intervened to ask what was going on. Well, lo and behold, this one teacher had her own teaching methodology, and this methodology that she looked at was this theory, because she claimed to be a psychologist as well, was that kids need to fail to succeed. So what this teacher was doing was literally harming the children's self-esteem to make them stronger people. She brought forward this fictitious garbage document that even the principal of the school wasn't aware of. So once my wife got involved and looked at that teaching method was then gone. But this individual, this teacher, was still within there. So these things do happen. And when my daughter Cora went to go for that same teacher, was teaching her French class, it was the same type of tactics. These things happen in our public schools as well. So when we're talking about these bubbles and insular against the parents, the ones that actually love and care for these children, I would hardly imagine that the numbers are higher than what these kids are exposed to in the public system of any potential forms or issues like that. The members opposite had also mentioned about the kindergarten to grade 12, where they were concerned that there was vocation learning potentially would be taking place in this potential new system. So almost as if there's this academic snobbery that if you learn with your hands or if you have a different methodology of learning, then that's a bad thing. You shouldn't be exposed to anything that's a type of vocation until grade 7. Well, anybody who's grown up with their parents that actually spend time with them, either working in the garage or in the shop or on the farm or anything else, you're actually being exposed to this all the way along. So the fact that there's some harm or some potential of, a parent actually being an electrician and the child might become an electrician one day or being exposed to it, I think there's also some positioning there that needs to be corrected. And again, I'm a member of the Skilled Trades Caucus. I'm the vice chair of that, and I'm also sitting on the Skilled Trades Task Force. And one of the biggest things that we're working on is the parity of STEAM. And that's to make sure that folks understand that different alternate deliveries of method and teaching should be looked at along the same ways, that it's not a bad thing to be able to get a trade or to go along those lines. And some of the falsehoods that are out there is if you're stuck in one particular form of learning, well, then you're stuck. So if you're going to become a tradesperson, that's all you're going to ever be when you grow up, and you'll never advance any further. But when you actually start looking at the holistic model and you look at different jurisdictions, if I looked over in Europe, and I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this place called Germany, they tend to have some pretty good engineers over there and some pretty good craftspeople. Well, they're kind of world-renowned for that. The Swiss are as well, and you look at some of the European models. The fundamental difference there is that everyone is exposed to a vocation one way, shape, form, or another in this type of learning. So it doesn't have to be just skilled trades with your hand. If you're taking engineering there, you actually have to be exposed to a craft or a trade for 1 year to actually get your degree and your certificate. It's a different way of doing it, and that's why we're focusing in on these items. When you have a well-rounded education, exposure to all these different things, we actually have better people. So when we're building projects and you have project teams, you don't want the same type of people coming in all the time. To have a major project, and I can see one of my colleagues nodding across the aisle, he understands that you need that diversity. You need folks from different parts of the world. You need different vocations within those areas, the accountants, the lawyers, the tradespeople, et cetera. And that's what you need to build a project team. So why would we limit in Alberta, when we want our competitive advantage to be so high, to only have one methodology of teaching or only one type of curriculum out there? Why wouldn't we want that diversity and that choice to fit in those areas, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair? When we look at these different ladders of learning, I can accredit a lot of my learning was actually once I got out of school, once you actually start applying these. And we had this thing, basically it was transferable skill sets. You might learn one craft or one method of learning, and then you apply it to a different model and you expose yourself to it. And that's the only way that we can really get there. So if I was looking at these ladders of learning, there would be a trade, maybe an engineering faculty, and maybe something on the business side that would actually get you to running a company. And that's the type of things that having these choices out there will actually afford people to allow. So I don't want to chew up too much more time on this. I think, Minister of Education, thank you so much. And again, because of these choices and because of what's taking place, I'm going to have my son going back to high school next year. He's going to stay within that stream. My 3 daughters are going to sidestep what was taking place within that jurisdiction. My wife is then taking Alberta distance learning curriculum to be able to apply it to them. She supplemented and augmented that with all the other type of items that were out there now because of COVID and the availability of this access to information. And this is a wonderful experience for our family to do that. We anticipate that our girls will pop back into the high school curriculum at that point, once they're at the high school level. But honestly, with everything that's taking place in the moving parts, my kids, my daughters, are the ones that ask my wife to be able to be taught at home after seeing the difference of what they were doing within the public system to theirs. So we were talking about children having choices. My little girls are strong, independent young ladies, and you can't really peg them in a corner and tell them what to do. We've treated them with that kind, loving thing. We've grown up with wanting kids to become young adults that have that form of critical thinking, and that's the only way that we can do this. So thank you so much for those choices, and with that, I'll turn it over to the next person who wants to talk. Thank you.